Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Is Black Panther leader Huey Newton guilty of a vicious crime, or is the state of California? Free Huey, the whole story of his trial for murder by defense counsel Edward M. Keating. Introduction by Charles Gary. The case against Huey Newton. The first trial, charged with murder and kidnapping. Huey Newton was declared guilty only of manslaughter. Subsequently, even this half-hearted conviction was thrown out by a higher court, and a new trial scheduled for early 1971. The second trial. Will it settle the question, did Huey Newton actually shoot two policemen, or was he the victim of an elaborate frame-up, the first target in an organized drive to crush the Black Panther Party and its leaders? In this book, all the facts are presented. Let every reader sit in judgment. Edward M. Keating is a prominent West Coast lawyer. Mr. Keating is the founder of Ramparts magazine and has served on the Newton defense team. He has twice been a peace candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. Charles Gary has been chief defense lawyer for both Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. Bobby Seale's insistence upon a court adjournment in the trial of the Chicago 8 until Gary was free to defend him led to Seale's eventual citation for contempt. Free Huey, Edward M. Keating. Introduction by Charles Gary. Dedicated to the wretched of the earth. Copyright 1970. Edward M. Keating. My position is that I am absolutely against violence. Violence indicates aggression. I am for self-defense. Self-defense is a declaration against violence. Violence can be inflicted in many ways. The epitome of violence is the vicious service revolver of the police on the local level and the rifle of the military on the national and international level. Violence comes in many forms. To deprive children of food is a manifestation of violence. To deprive our people of necessary housing is another. To deprive us of full employment is a violent action. In short, we will defend ourselves against a violent system so that violence will end. Repression is on the rise for sure. The country is going further and further to the right toward fascism. At the same time, many people are becoming socially and politically aware because repression breeds resistance. Conflicts always lead to change. We want to make sure it is a change for the better. We can only do this by politically educating our people. Huey Newton, in a prison interview by Joy Johnson, published in Ramparts magazine. Introduction. In April of 1970, Yale President Kingman Brewster Jr. declared, "I am appalled and ashamed that things have come to such a pass that I am skeptical of the ability of black revolutionaries to achieve a fair trial anywhere in the United States. I have been practicing criminal law for over 30 years, and during that time I have seen how our court system operates. I have seen that there is one law for white Americans and another law for black and brown Americans. High bails for black and brown Americans and low bails for whites. Light sentences or probation for whites and lengthy prison terms for black and brown Americans. And convictions against black and brown people were, with the identical evidence, a white person would be acquitted. Finally, I've seen Bobby Seale gagged and bound in Chicago for trying to exercise his constitutional right to defend himself in court. I have defended many black and brown Americans in the course of my career, and I know that in order to do my best for a black or brown client, I must work much harder than if I am defending a white client, because there is so much to overcome. An attorney defending a black and brown person accused of a crime in an American court must overcome not only the overt and covert prejudices of the judges and jurors on the one hand, but also the built-in inequities of the system that have allowed our courts to become such racist institutions that black, brown, red, and poor people no longer believe they can get fair trials. If you don't believe the court systems are racist, take a look at our prisons. You will find that members of minority groups comprise a majority of the prison population. One of the worst inequities built into the legal system is the grand jury. In California, members of the grand jury are chosen by the superior court judges of the county. The judge selects people, quote unquote, known to him personally. How many black, brown, red, poor, working people know Superior Court judges personally? It is no wonder that grand juries in California and elsewhere are dominated by white, middle, and upper class people. On the grand jury that indicted Huey P. Newton for murder, there was only one black person, and that person was not even present the day the evidence against Huey was presented. There are close to 200,000 black people living in Alameda County, out of a total population of 1.2 million people. Yet there was only one black on the grand jury. The same holds true for regular juries. Jurors are selected from voter registration lists. A large block of black and other minority group members either don't vote because they see little hope in achieving any power through the ballot box, or because they are kept from registering to vote by a maze of discriminatory regulations. At any rate, only a small percentage of them ever wind up on juries, especially when the defendant is black. There are several reasons for this. One is that prosecutors tend to distrust blacks. Part of this is due to the innate and unconscious racism of many district attorneys. Lowell Jensen, the man who prosecuted Huey Newton and who is now the district attorney, and his subordinates attempt to exclude black Americans from cases involving black militants. Prosecutors are always aware that policemen do not have a very high reputation in the black community these days, and they obviously feel that black jurors are less likely to accept a policeman's version of an incident than are most white jurors. They must also know that many black people have friends or relatives who have been unjustly prosecuted and railroaded by ambitious and insensitive district attorneys. Furthermore, in order to serve on a jury, a person must be able to serve without pressures, financial or otherwise. Thus, many jurors tend to be either government employees of some sort or get paid their regular salaries while on jury duty. Employees of large corporations who are similarly compensated, retired people, or people who can afford the time it takes to serve on a jury. Many blacks and other minorities are employed in marginal jobs where they are the last people hired and the first fired. They often quite legitimately fear that while they are serving on a jury, their job will have been quote-unquote phased out, or the boss will suspect them of malingering. Therefore, they beg off jury duty. The jury that tried Huey Newton had but one black person on it, and he was an executive with the Bank of America. Hardly one of Huey's peers from out of the ghetto. In questioning the other jurors and prospective jurors, I used over 290 different questions trying to get at their overt and latent racist attitudes. Many of them had not even heard of the Kerner Report. Most juries, in my opinion, do not even remotely understand the sociological, political, and economic backgrounds of blacks and other minorities on trial, and are therefore incapable of rendering a fair verdict. This is especially true when the defendants are members of a well-publicized group like the Black Panther Party, whose basic aims and purposes have been grossly distorted by the mass media. Huey's trial was in many ways like the trial of any other black man in America. The overt prejudice of the judge, he was and still is a member of a club which excludes blacks from membership, the potential jurors, and the mass media were there. It was clear that the state was prosecuting Huey with the vigor and determination it only seems to muster up for the third world people. But in Huey's case, the prosecution went to even greater lengths to obtain a conviction. Huey Newton was the founder of the Black Panther Party and is the Minister of Defense. Since it was founded in October 1966, the Panther Party had patrolled the police in Oakland, documenting cases of police brutality and killings in the ghetto. It had become a target not only for the Oakland Police Department, but for the entire power structure in the Bay Area. Powerful men like William P. Noland, the publisher of the Oakland Tribune, a former Republican leader in the United States Senate, and an avid supporter of China's deposed General Chiang Kai-shek, and Edgar Kaiser, president of the Oakland-based Kaiser Industries, a huge defense contractor, were none too happy about the emergence of the Panther Party, which was not only exposing police crime in the black community, but which bitterly criticized America's war in Vietnam, while quoting extensively from Chairman Mao Zedong, Malcolm X, Che Guevara, and Franz Fanon. On May 2nd, 1967, 25 Panthers went up to the state legislature in Sacramento to protest the passage of gun laws that they felt were aimed directly at them. They marched into the legislature with their weapons, which was perfectly legal at that time and soon became a nationally known organization. Soon after Sacramento, they began recruiting young blacks at an incredibly swift pace. By late October 1967, when Huey's car was illegally stopped by Oakland patrolman John Frey because it was a, quote, known Panther vehicle, the Black Panther Party had been active not only in Oakland but in the black communities of Richmond and San Francisco. But what was forgotten in all the hullabaloo over the guns at Sacramento was that the Panthers' main purpose in going there was to read a statement, Executive Mandate Number 1, written by Huey P. Newton from the steps of the state capitol. The mandate said, "The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general and the black people in particular to take careful note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed and powerless at the very same time that racist police agencies throughout the country are intensifying the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of black people. At the same time that the American government is waging a war of genocide in Vietnam, the concentration camps in which Japanese Americans were interned during World War II are being renovated and expanded. Since America has historically reserved the most barbaric treatment for non-white people, we are forced to conclude that people who are determined to gain their freedom must use any means necessary. The enslavement of black people from the very beginning of this country, the genocide practiced on the American Indians, and the confining of the survivors on reservations, the savage lynching of thousands of black men and women, the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and now the cowardly massacre in Vietnam all testify to the fact that toward people of color, the racist power structure has but one policy: repression, genocide, terror, and the big stick. Black people have begged, prayed, petitioned, demonstrated, and everything else to get the racist power structure of America to right the wrongs which have historically been perpetrated against black people. All of these efforts have been answered by more repression, deceit, and hypocrisy. As the aggression of the racist American government escalates in Vietnam, the police agencies of America escalate the repression of black people throughout the ghettos of America. Vicious police dogs, cattle prods, and increased patrols have become familiar sights in black communities. City Hall turns a deaf ear to the pleas of black people for the relief from this increasing terror. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense believes that the time has come for black people to arm themselves against this terror before it is too late. The pending Mulford Act brings the hour of doom one step nearer. A people who have suffered so much for so long at the hands of a racist society must draw the line somewhere. We believe that the black communities of America must rise up, one man to halt the progression of a trend that leads inevitably to their total destruction. It is the author of this eloquent and prophetic statement, written 6 months before the encounter with Officer Frey, that the prosecution tried to portray as a mere small-time hoodlum and black racist fanatic. Despite what they tried to get the public and jury to believe, the establishment no doubt correctly perceived Huey Newton as a symbol of black people rising up against the inequities of the system. For that reason, they were ready to use any means at their disposal, legal or not, to send him to the gas chamber, just as they had disposed of Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and Martin Luther King. During the course of Huey's trial, as Ed Keating describes in detail in this book, we found that the transcript of a tape-recorded statement made by a key prosecution witness had been incorrectly transcribed at a crucial point. We found our efforts to correct this important error in time for the jury to be told of it impeded and undermined by the prosecution. We found that prosecution witnesses were changing their testimony from that which they had given in earlier statements or in testimony before the grand jury so that their stories would conform to the police version of the incident. We also discovered that one witness must have been intimidated into supplying testimony favorable to the prosecution's case, and that another witness was kept hidden from us completely so that we couldn't interview him or delve into his background before he went on the witness stand. Finally, a vital instruction to the jury which he had asked for was not given by the judge. Fortunately, the California Court of Appeal found that the methods used to prosecute Huey were not proper and reversed his conviction for voluntary manslaughter. Huey cannot be tried again for murder, and he will not get a new trial on the manslaughter charge. I am confident he will be acquitted at his next trial. Ed Keating's book gives you an idea of what it is like to defend a black man, and especially a Black Panther Party leader in an American court. It also gives you some insight into what black people in general face in the courts. Most of them don't have a staff of legal workers and lawyers working on their cases, or men like Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, and David Hilliard to bring their story to the community. Free Huey also gives you a glimpse of Huey P. Newton himself, certainly one of the most extraordinary people I have ever had the privilege of meeting. When I first entered the case in December of 1967, I thought that from my involvement in the civil rights movement, I knew something of what it was like to be a black man in America. Several talks with Huey in the Alameda County Jail convinced me that I knew nothing about it at all. Consequently, I spent most of my time during the 7 months before the trial reading everything I could about the black man and the black experience in America. From all that reading, however, I would not have gained any real insight or understanding if I hadn't been talking regularly with Huey. It was he who taught me the difference between a black man and a Negro. Some of Huey's ideas about the historical role black people have played in America, how they have been used and subjugated, and how they must liberate themselves are quoted in this book. The quotations are taken directly from the trial transcript and are written down exactly as Huey spoke them when he testified. By reading Free Huey, you will, I hope, come to realize that the trial of Huey Newton, as are the forthcoming trials of Bobby Seale, David Hilliard, and almost every other Black Panther Party member, is really the trial of all black people in America. They must not be sacrificed to this country's genocidal, worldwide crusade against people of color. All power to the people. Charles R. Gary, San Francisco, California, October 1970. Prologue. To fully understand the significance of the trial of Huey P. Newton, it is first necessary to be aware that the sudden emergence of the Black Panther Party on the American scene stems from the result of that trial. When Newton was tried for the murder of an Oakland police officer, assault with a deadly weapon against another police officer, and the kidnapping of a civilian, the Black Panther Party was essentially an Oakland, California group. The offenses charged took place October 28, 1967. The Black Panther Party was only 1 year old at that time. The trial took place in 1968, commencing in July and ending in September. Since then, the Black Panther Party has become a national phenomenon. Men like J. Edgar Hoover claim it is the greatest internal menace facing the nation. Thousands of young blacks cry, "Right on!" and raise their clenched fist in a Panther salute. There are no neutral feelings toward the Black Panthers. They arouse powerful emotions in every part of the country and many parts of the world. Despite the stories appearing in national magazines and despite the realms of columns appearing almost daily in the nation's newspapers, very little is known of the Panthers. Facts such as a political platform and breakfast for school children are lost in the welter of emotionalism, both favorable and unfavorable. In a sense, this should be an epilogue instead of a prologue. I should be able to go directly into the story of the trial of Huey P. Newton and then reflect on the consequences arising from his trial and conviction. Unfortunately, because of the wild events of the last year and a half, Newton himself has fallen into the background. It is not total. Tens of thousands of black people, principally the young, revere his name and have his picture on the wall. Most blacks, including most Panthers, have never met Newton or heard his voice, but white Americans by and large have scarcely heard his name or even know that he exists. And yet, if we are going to understand the Black Panther Party, we must first understand Newton, who along with Bobby Seale was the founder of the Black Panther Party. Further, in order to understand the racial, political, and legal dynamics affecting practically all sectors of society, we must see these dynamics as they affected the case of the people of California versus Huey P. Newton. I was one of the lawyers who helped defend Newton. For that reason, my fairness may be legitimately questioned. To forestall criticism, I have, in what follows, faithfully presented the chronology of events in and around the trial. Every word that purports to have been said before the grand jury that indicted Newton and during the trial itself comes directly from the transcripts of the two proceedings. Because men don't ordinarily speak in complete or grammatical sentences, I have had to straighten out sentences quite frequently. In addition to the above-mentioned transcripts, I have availed myself of police reports and records. Also, a police radio tape and the tape of an interview with a key witness are set forth herein. Because I have heard the tapes many times, I have tried to translate the tones and voices of the speakers, as they sometimes help to express feelings better than the barer words. In no instance, however, have I altered either the content or the tone of anything said by anyone in the case. Events detailed other than those mentioned above are authenticated either by public knowledge, the press, or my own direct and personal knowledge. I do not flatter myself for being truthful. Anything short of the truth, anything in excess of the truth, would be a disservice to the reader, to Huey Newton, and to every American concerned with legal and racial justice. The trial of Huey Newton is an important legal document. It raises the fundamental question of whether a black man can receive justice in an American court. It is also an important social document as it presents, through Newton on the witness stand, the political philosophy of the Black Panther Party. The conviction of Newton is important because it was the opening salvo of the battle between the Panthers and those they believe must represent the oppressive white power structure, the police. Newton was the heart, the mind, and the soul of the Black Panther Party. His conviction removed him from active daily leadership. Men as independent-minded as Eldridge Cleaver and as remote as Bobby Seale bowed to Newton's primacy. But a revolution cannot be conducted from an isolated prison cell 200 miles from the nearest major black ghetto. It could be, and often is, argued that the conviction of Newton was the signal for the tracking down of the Black Panther Party. Lost in the pyrotechnics of both the trial and after events is the central issue of the trial. Did Newton kill one policeman, wound another, and kidnap a civilian in an escape attempt? This is the central question raised by this book. The answer, based upon the evidence, and only the evidence, makes for an important document in modern American history.